Well, welcome back. The big Senate Environment and Public Works Committee hearing on the state of Climategate took place yesterday on what has been called the greatest scientific scandal of our generation. And, man, the sparks were flying. Senator Bernie Sanders made one of those over-the-top, unfortunate comparisons that gets a lot of people into really big trouble, but apparently it was no problem for him. Senator Sanders compared climate change and a much darker time in world history. Take a listen to this.
The reason that this debate is so important is that it reminds me in some ways of the debate taking place in this country and around the world in the late 1930s. And during that period, with Nazism and fascism growing, a real danger to the United States and democratic countries all over the world, there were people in this Congress, in the British Parliament, saying, don't worry, Hitler is not real. It'll disappear. We don't have to be prepared to take it on.
Wow. So, well, Senator Sanders is, first of all, his sense of history needs a little adjustment. And I think the analog that he chose to compare climate change to is at best unfortunate. My guest called for and led that hearing yesterday and was in the middle of the exchange with Senator Sanders. Please welcome to the broadcast Senator James Inhofe, who's chairman of the ranking member of the Environment Public Works Committee. It's great to have you with us, Senator.
Well, Lou, it's nice. It's nice to be. It's nice.
I gotta. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here. I'm so anxious to ask you a question. I can't even. I apologize. Let me try this again. Welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be with you. I think we might have a technical problem here.
Well, I think the technical problem is I was just so excited to ask you what in the world were you thinking when Senator Sanders was comparing the rise of
actually, yeah. Well, yeah. Since I never listen when he talks, nothing really came through my mind. Senator Sanders is really not a bad guy, but he was a registered socialist for a long time. Well, I guess maybe he still is. Is he still? Yeah, he still is. And so he's on that committee. I have to say this, Lou. You remember when Republicans were a majority, I was the chairman of that committee. Then when we lost our majority, Barbara Boxer became chairman. But what was interesting, if you were really watching or read some of the transcripts from yesterday, other than just Bernie Sanders, is I see this as almost the ultimate victory. After Climategate took place, and we have in our minority report, which you have a copy of, and any of our listeners can pull it up on inhofe.senate.gov. We have the documentation on all of these scientists that they flat cooked the science, all the stuff, the manipulating the data and obstructing the free. And as a matter of fact, the FOIA bill, that's the Freedom of Information, that's a criminal act. Over in Great Britain, they said they were guilty of that, but they couldn't prosecute because the statute of limitations had run. But this is serious stuff, and they're all dropping off right now, and these are the same ones that for the last 10 years I've been saying are cooking the science. And if anyone questions that, pull up on my website a speech I made 5 years ago where I said essentially the same thing that they just discovered through Climategate. So anyway, all's well that ends well. There's one remaining problem, though, Lou, as you well know. The reason we were all initially upset and opposed to all the cap-and-trade bills, and I'm talking about the McCain-Lieberman bill of 03, McCain-Lieberman bill of 05, and then on, is because it would have set off the largest tax increase in the history of America. The range was between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, since that is no longer, they can't pass the bill, what our very arrogant President Obama, has said is, all right, the Senate, if you're not going to pass a cap-and-trade bill, we will do a finding of endangerment, and we will throw CO2 in with the pollutants like SOx, NOx, and mercury, and we'll start regulating it. And that's where it is right now. But here's the catch, and that is that when Lisa Jackson was before our committee, that was just before Copenhagen, I asked her the question. I said, I think you guys are going to have an endangerment hearing, and what science are you basing that on? And she said, guess what she said, Lou? IPCC. That's the very science that's been totally discredited now.
By the way, the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change under the auspices of the United Nations, when the 2000 study, which is what they would be relying upon, is what has now been discredited and much of which has been withdrawn. Senator, talking about Lisa Jackson, she said the science behind climate change is settled and human activity is responsible for global warming. Is there no way in which to have a further discussion with the good administrator about what is settled and what is not?
Well, she's a pretty decent person,
right.
And she's normally...
well, I think she's a lovely person,
What I'm saying is, I said to her during the hearing yesterday morning, I said, Lisa, Phil Jones, who was the clearinghouse over there at East Anglica, he was the one, the CRU over there, kind of the head of all the scientists.
Right. The head of the Climate Research Unit.
And he said, and this is a quote, he said, "I don't believe the vast majority of climate scientists think the debate is over." In other words, this is mixed, and this is the head guy admitting that, and yet Lisa Jackson won't admit that. Now, she'll go forward with this, Lou, but this doesn't bother me that much, because now that she's made the statement, two statements. One is that that's the science she's relying on, and the other is, and this happened several weeks ago, even if we passed either a bill that had cap and trade, or if they did it through the Clean Air Act, as they're talking about doing through an endangerment finding, that would only affect the United States. So the question I ask her is, if you do this, is this going to have the result of reducing CO2 emissions? And she said no. Obviously, it wouldn't. If we just do it in the United States,
right,
that would mean that things would pick up in China and Mexico and places where they don't have any emission standards. And so it would actually have the effect of increasing CO2. You combine those two things, no rational person in America is going to say that we are going to sit back and approve of them passing what would be, again, the largest tax increase in our country's history that doesn't accomplish anything.
Well, you also shocked a lot of people by calling for the former Vice President, Al Gore, to defend climate claims before Congress himself.
But Lou, remember what he said in his science fiction movie. He asserted roughly 8 different things. The melting of the Himalaya glaciers, that's been disproven. 40% of the Amazon rainforest would be gone. That's not true. Melt the ice, mountain ice in the Andes and the Alps. All these things about endangered species and the crop production dropped by 50% in Africa. All 8 of these assertions have now been totally debunked. Now, that puts him in a position where it'd be kind of nice, and we've invited him to come back in a period of hearings so we can say, all right, you made this movie. What science did you base these 8 assertions on? Because now they've all been debunked. And by the way, if you have listeners out there who don't feel sorry for Al Gore, he's done very well. It's our information. He's pushing $1 billion on this thing now.
Wow. I knew that he was involved with a company that was getting a $500 million contract. I had no idea that it was reaching that.
Well, Lou, there was something in the New York Times that said that they think he's going to be the first environmental billionaire, because they've been kind of monitoring. It's a combination of the speaking fees and all that, although I think speaking fees are going to be going down dramatically.
Well...
And ours will be going up. How's that?
There you go. Mr. Gore may have a little problem with fact-based audiences. As you look at what's happening here, Senator, there is a palpable change, even within the Fourth Estate, which has been so pro-Al Gore, as a liberal national media. It is understandable that it would embrace climate change and all that is advocated by the left. But we're seeing, I think, a real a period here of pause on the part of the national media, because I think they understand that there are some things amiss now that they never imagined.
Well, that's true. If you look at all the magazines, Newsweek, Time, all the U.S. News and Report, World Report, they've all come, and most of them have called for an investigation. And that's a total reversal of the past. You remember Time magazine, back in 1975, their cover was "Another Ice Age is Coming, We're All Going to Die." Then that same Time magazine 2 years ago had the last polar bear standing on the last cube of ice and said, now global warming's coming, we're all going to die. Now Time is back calling for an investigation. So a lot of people make a lot of money off these things, and that's going to happen. I want to make sure I get one thing in that I think is important, and that is what they're trying to say now is that the Climategate was just some memos that maybe were misunderstood or something like that. That isn't at all true. We have the actual and if anyone wants to get our Minority Report and read it, they can. But places like the UK Telegraph, that's one of the largest newspapers in London, they said that this is the most serious scientific scandal of our generation. The Atlantic magazine says the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. The Chicago Tribune, UN credibility on climate change is gone. I mean, that's all you're hearing now, and it's all as a result of this really bad scandal. So it came along. It's kind of funny because it came along right before I went to Copenhagen to disavow everything that the president said and John Kerry said over there. Timing was good.
The timing is good, and I'm going to say this because one of the things I don't think happens often enough in our society, in part because it doesn't happen so often, that we have public figures who stand up, who set their feet squarely forward and say, this is nonsense. We have to be fact-based. We have to be rational, and this nonsense has to end. James Inhofe has been such a man over the past 6-7 years. He sometimes stood absolutely alone and was demonized, vilified, ridiculed by the national media. He stands now in 2010 as a man utterly vindicated, and for whom I think everybody needs to, extend a round of applause. Senator Inhofe, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
You got it. You take care. Now, it's funny. The national media never likes to give credit where credit is due, because of the politics, the cant, the bias. But I mean, really, this man, at many junctures, was absolutely singular. He was absolutely alone in resisting a wave of popular faddism, which was climate change and global warming. So I sincerely mean that. He deserves a great deal of both applause and respect for what he has done.